Okay, it'll help if you have your pink handout, which is your muscle sheet. Remember that we're not doing origins and insertions this time. You're not learning these this time. We know that every muscle does have an origin and an insertion. But we're just choosing to look at these muscles. You know that next week you will have a muscle quiz, but it'll simply be identification. Just look at the pictures that I show you throughout this presentation here. Will be pictures that you would see. The ones from your textbook. I have a few other pictures in here. The ones from your textbook will be the ones that will be on the quiz, and that's next week. So, let's look at these. The first thing that you would want to notice is that your handout has 4 big groups of muscles, doesn't it? Okay, so let's just very briefly, let's look at these 4 groups. The first group is a group of large muscles that run up and down the back. These are posterior muscles. You don't see them typically because they're deep. If you look at the back of our muscle picture that we've been studying for a while, you saw the trapezius and the latissimus dorsi. These are all superficial. The muscles that actually move your torso are deeper. Remember, those muscles that we see superficially on the back are moving the humerus. We study them as part of the upper limb. The muscles that move your torso are deeper. And we have this large group of muscles that run up and down the back. In fact, almost a third of all muscles in your human body are clustered around the vertebral column. Lots and lots of muscles that are in and around there trying to make the precise adjustments to your vertebral column. With it being made out of 24 separate vertebrae, if you had a kink in there, if you had a twist in there, if the vertebral column could bend too much at one spot, you'd have big troubles. And so you've got little muscles and big muscles all up and down your vertebral column from behind that are controlling the gentle, precise movements of the vertebral column. The second group of muscles are like their antagonists or their complements, and these are the abdominal muscles. The abdominal muscles are anterior, the vertebral muscles are posterior, and if you move laterally or medially, they're going to work in concert with one another. But if you're going to flex your torso, you're going to use primarily abdominal muscles. If you're going to extend your torso, you're going to use primarily vertebral muscles. The third group that you see on your list are what we refer to as breathing muscles. These are muscles that are clustered around the rib cage. In order to breathe, you must expand the size of your thoracic cavity. The size of the thoracic cavity has to increase. And so these muscles do that. The lungs in your body have no means of drawing air into themselves. They do not have muscles. There are some smooth muscles around some of the breathing tubes, but that's only to make the tubes smaller or larger. It has nothing to do with breathing. It's the skeletal muscles around your rib cage that expand and contract the size of the thoracic cavity. The fourth group then, if you look all the way to the bottom, are called the perineal muscles. Now to understand these, you have to know where the perineum is. The perineum is basically your pelvic outlet. It's down around your anus and your genital area. It's that space in underneath between your thighs on the torso. And you have muscles that are related to your anal and urinary functions. You have muscles that are related to genital functions. And basically you've got some muscles that are just providing a floor down here in the pelvic cavity so that your guts don't fall out your bottom. So four big groups of muscles. Now we're going to look at those in more detail now. So let's look at the vertebral muscles. Let's start with the very first group. This is the image that you have from your textbook. And one of the first things to notice when you look at this is that you have a superficial side and a deep side. Okay, if you look over here, you've got to imagine that all of these muscles are on this side superficially, and all of these muscles that you see here are on this side, but deep. Okay, so everything is bilateral here, but they've just drawn superficial muscles on one side and deep on the other so that you could get the idea of this. Now, we're going to find a group of large muscles and a group of small muscles, and that's why if you look at this whole group of muscles of the vertebral column, you see a space between the two groups on your sheet, don't you? There's a group up above called the erector spinae. You want to become familiar with that term. This is the group of muscles, the big ones. These big long ones that run up and down somewhat near the vertebral column. They anchor on a vertebra and onto ribs. And they control the extension and the abduction and the adduction and the rotation of the vertebral column. These muscles jump long distances. And as a group, this is a group of muscles, so erector spinae is a group name. Literally, the name means to straighten the spine. So to make it straight. Actually, these muscles are involved in curving your spine, your posture. Every day, sitting up or standing, the curve, those four curves that we've talked about in your spine are held in place by these muscles. These muscles are constantly contracted. If you're sitting up or you're standing up, these muscles have a slight contraction to them, even without you thinking of moving them. They're constantly being contracted by your brain. Now, the erector spinae as a group has three distinct muscles within the group. And you see them there on your list. The first of these three would be what we call iliocostalis. Iliocostalis is the lateral most muscle in the group. So it's on the outside, isn't it? It's the ones running up the lateral side over here. This iliocostalis is in three pieces. There's a piece that jumps from down here around the sacrum and the ilium up onto the lower ribs. There's another one that attaches from these lower ribs up onto the upper ribs. And then there's a piece that jumps from the upper ribs onto the cervical vertebra. So I have sort of a connection in three jumps from the sacrum here and the ilium all the way up to the cervical vertebra. These muscles are running all the way up. So you'll see, like in your handout, that iliocostalis isn't listed as one muscle. It's actually listed as three, isn't it? And so this piece, you can see the three lines that I have here. The piece down here that's coming from here up onto these lower ribs is called iliocostalis lumborum. Okay? Down in this area, a muscle that's down in this area is going to be called lumborum. The one in the middle, the one that reaches higher up onto the upper ribs here, is going to be called thoracis. And the one that reaches from the upper ribs all the way up into the neck is going to be called cervicis. So there is an iliocostalis lumborum, iliocostalis thoracis, iliocostalis cervicis. Everybody got the idea? When you think of this erector spinae, you're really talking about, and I haven't listed all the muscles, I think there's a total of 9 muscles in this group. But they're in 3 basic muscle names, but each of these then have 3 parts to them. So this can get pretty complicated. But once you see the pattern, it's not that bad. So here's iliocostalis in its 3 parts. And you need to say, like if somebody's saying, what muscle is this? You need to say iliocostalis thoracis. Now, if we're going to go from lateral to medial. So just inside, you can see the these ilicostalis are the lateral most muscles. Just inside that are the muscles called longissimus. Okay, so here's longissimus. Now, longissimus doesn't start all the way down here at the sacrum. Longissimus then starts more in the center here and then works its way up. So there's a longissimus thoracis. There's a longissimus cervicis. And then if any of these muscles reach all the way to the skull, there's a fourth term that we use, the term capitis. So in the longissimus muscles, you'll see longissimus thoracis, cervicis, and capitis. And you have those three listed there, right? Okay. And now when we come to the medial most of these muscles, we come to a muscle group called spinalis. Spinalis. And spinalis thoracis is right here. You can see it's right on the spine, right next to the spinous processes of the vertebral column. So there's a lot of little clues. If you just think through this, get it straight in your mind, study it, review it, you shouldn't have much problem with this. There are other bits of spinalis. Spinalis actually has a thoracis, a cervicis, and a capitis. The picture that we have in our textbook doesn't show us those other bits, so I'm not going to put them on the list that you need to know. But just file it away somewhere. All three of these have three parts to them. So we're only showing you one of the spinalis parts. Good? All right. Now those, go ahead, William.
So the longissimus is more medial to the ilicostalis and the spinalis.
Lateral, more medial, most medial, right? If you're going from outside to inside. Okay. Now these are the big muscles. All of the big long muscles. These jump long distances going up and down your back. Muscles that jump many joints that jump long distances like this are for power and speed. These are the muscles that provide the oomph in what you do. Along with this group, though, there's another group of muscles, and you see them more here on the deep side where you can see, I can see the transverse processes here. I can see the little lumps. See the lumps along here? Those little lumps would represent what, do you think? If I'm looking right here along the middle and I see these little lumps of bone, what are those? Spinous process. If you run your finger down somebody's back and it goes lump, 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 those are the spinous processes, aren't they? So what I've got now in my second group in this vertebral territory, the second group of muscles are muscles that just run basically from one vertebra to its neighbor. Just one to the other. If there was a muscle between two spinous processes, what do you think you'd call it? Between two spinous processes, interspinous something, right? These are actually called interspinales, okay? And basically, like in your textbook, they show them right here, right up in the cervical area. They show them because you can see the spinous processes nicely. They run all the way down. If you've got 24 individual vertebrae and you've got a connection above and below that, how many muscles do you have here? "24 little vertebrae, you've got a muscle in between each, and you've got a connection above and below. You've got 25 muscles here. You've got 25 muscles that are all called interspinales. Now, we can double that with the next muscle. We've got a muscle called intertransversarii. Where would this muscle be? You know this just by its name, don't you? Between the transverse processes, of course. And you've got these running all the way up and down. You can see them a little. They chose to show them down here in the lumbar area, but you've got to think they're all the way up and down. I've got a transverse process on both sides of the vertebra, don't I? So I've got double the amount of muscles, don't I? I've got 50 little intertransversary muscles. So now I'm up to 75 of these little muscles clustered around the vertebral column. Okay? Now, your textbook has another picture that's really nice. I really liked it. This wasn't in for a while, and then they put it in maybe 6 or 8 years ago, and I went, this is very helpful. Can you make out where what you're looking at here? Most people have to stop for a minute and get their bearings. Here are the transverse processes, right? And here are the spinous processes. You're looking at the vertebral column, not straight from behind, but sort of at an angle. You're looking at the valley sort of between a spinous process and a transverse process. You see that? It's like if the transverse process is going this way and the spinous process is here. I'm looking in at an angle, right? They say here posterolateral. I'm looking from behind, but kind of from the side. So I can see what sits between the two. And here I can see the intertransversarii. I can see here the interspinales, here between the spinous processes. But notice I see a number of diagonal muscles in here too. These are the multifidus and the rotatores. Now, I want you to think for a minute, see if you can figure this out. If all of these little interspinales muscles contracted, what would my vertebral column do? If all of the spinous processes got closer to each other, what would my body do? All my spinous processes here, okay? If they all were pulled closer to each other, what would happen? You'd go like this, wouldn't you? See how all the spinous processes are getting closer? So I would do this, wouldn't I? Right? What if I pulled all the transverse processes on one side closer to each other? What would I do? Yeah, I'd go this way, wouldn't I? And my brain would have to relax the ones on this side, because if both sides pulled, I'd just stay in the middle, wouldn't I? So, but these can pull, and I'd go like this, and then if these stop, and then these start pulling, then I'm going to come back over like this, right? These are going to make all the little subtle adjustments. Now, what you're going to see is both multifidus and rotatores, they cross from a transverse process to a spinous process. What happens when I pull a spinous process toward a transverse process? Right? What's happening here? I'm doing this, aren't I? Right? If each transverse process is pulled sideways and each one, boom, boom, see how that's rotating? Right? So these multifidus and these rotatores in here, because they run diagonally, they're going to cause this kind of action to happen. But again, it's just making the adjustment from one little muscle to the next. How many of these muscles am I likely to have then? Okay? A lot. Upwards of 100 or more. If I just had one of each and 25, just like the intertransversary, if I had 25 on each side, and I've got two sets, I've got 100. Now I'm up to 175 muscles out of about 600 in your whole body. Okay? Then if you count all the erector spinae that we talked about, some others, we're at almost a third of all of the muscles in your human body are clustered here around the vertebral column. And their actions, there's 3 primary actions here, depending upon which muscle it is. There's extension, right? There's abduction and adduction, and there's rotation. Okay? So these are the muscles functioning along the back. The little muscles are for precision, for agility, precision, precise control, getting each vertebra adjusted precisely to its neighbor. The big erector spinae are for the big power type movements to give you some strength. All right? So that's your vertebral column. These are the muscles that are moving those. You can imagine if any one of these little muscles went out, every other muscle here is dependent upon the precise movement of its neighbors. It's like a whole stack of acrobats. If one of them falls out of the stack, they all come tumbling down. And you can have huge problems with your back just losing one or two of these little muscles. So there's a lot of implications here. There's so many muscles, they need to work with one another. So, and I'm just sure I've known different people with odd back problems and, just things that they can't quite get at. And undoubtedly, it's a problem with just one of these little, or maybe two or three of these little tiny muscles in there. Okay. So, the four muscles here, right, remember, are the interspinales, right, the intertransversarii, the multifidus. The multifidus is the more superficial of these, so when you're looking at the vertebral column and you're looking for these diagonal muscles, that's the one you'll see. And then the rotatories are the deeper ones. But these last two are doing all of that rotational kind of motion. All right, so that's group one. Now group two, the second group of muscles, are the abdominal muscles. Okay, these are the muscles that are really the complement to those vertebral muscles. If the vertebral muscles are primarily extensors, abdominal muscles are primarily flexors, right? These are bringing me forward. These are on the anterior side of my body. And the number one muscle here, muscle that would be most prominent, is the one right in the center called the rectus abdominis. Perhaps you remember that rectus means straight, right? And if you look closely at the fasciculi here, where the fibers would be, you can see that the fibers run straight up and down the belly. What's very interesting about this muscle is that it is in segments. There's a right side and a left side with connective tissue running right down the center, but each side then is divided into four panels. And there is a tendinous intersection here between these. The origin is down here at the pubic crest. The insertion is up onto the costal cartilages. And so what I'm really pulling is I'm pulling my chest down to my hips. Right? If people want to work their abdominal muscles, they do little crunches. When I was growing up, everybody did sit-ups, but they didn't think that when you do a sit-up, you're primarily working muscles in your hip that bring your thigh up to your body. Or in this case, you were bringing your body up to your thigh, but you're using your iliopsoas, your iliacus and psoas major muscles a whole lot, and not your abdominals so much. When you do little crunches, when you're just bringing your chest to your hips, the only thing you're using is your abdominal muscles. And rectus abdominis here is the primary muscle. So there's really 8 muscles to this, but we think of it all as one because it's got a single origin and a single insertion. It's funny when you look at this muscle, though, this rectus abdominis, if you look at it in a picture like you see over here, it's not red, is it? Why is it not red? Because it's covered with connective tissue, isn't it? All of that white is connective tissue. And you can see in this picture they've cut it away, haven't they? So that you could actually see the muscle. But the muscle is completely enveloped in what is called the rectus sheath. Like here's a lateral view, and this connective tissue runs all the way up and down, front and back. Are you familiar with the term sheath? You know what context we use that in? What?
We use
Yes, there was a tendon sheath. It's a covering. And you think of it sort of as a covering, like a sword sheath, right? Before there were guns that people fought with, they fought with swords and knives and stuff, right? And if you wanted to be an effective weapon, you wanted to keep it very sharp. But how do you carry it on your person and not cut yourself? Well, you slide it into a covering, right? They would make like a metal sleeve for it, and you could slide it in there, and you could tie the sleeve to your belt, and then you could put your sword in and bring it out, and then it's bouncing around on your side. It wouldn't cut you, right? And that covering is called a sheath. Divers often carry a knife with them if they get tangled in seaweed or have to fight off a shark. Well, they'll strap a sheath to their leg and put the knife in the sheath because it's a covering that protects it. So the sheath concept is that the rectus abdominis is covered front and back with connective tissue. The question is, why? Why do I have all this connective tissue here and I don't see it in other places? I don't see this kind of stuff in my arms or my legs or in other parts of my body. What? There's no bones here, is there? How many bones do you see in the space between your ribs and your hips? Especially in front here, there are none, right? Do I have more than one muscle here? Yes, I do. Right? There are 4 major abdominal muscles here, and you can see here laterally, I've got 3 lateral muscles here. You can only see the superficial one. There's 3 layers of muscles here. What are they going to anchor on if there's no bones? What do they hold on to? Well, what we do is we completely wrap the rectus abdominis with connective tissue to make it very, very strong, and then we can take these muscles on the side and tie them right into the rectus sheath. If we were doing origins and insertions, when we start describing these lateral muscles, the rectus sheath would be the insertion for a couple of these muscles here. Okay? So the rectus sheath is a very, very important structure to understand and to know. When people get hernias, if they have interabdominal hernias, it's usually a weakness in this sheath somewhere. A hernia is where you have a weakness in there, from any sort of interabdominal pressure. If you're grinding or squeezing or whatever, you can actually start weakening an area and actually push some of your intestines right through the connective tissue. And if intestines get trapped in that, they can get gangrenous and can create all sorts of problems. So a hernia is just a weakness in some of this connective tissue associated with the rectus sheath. Now, laterally, there are 3 muscles then. If we go back to, here's our picture, like this. There are these 3 lateral muscles that we need to know, right? And they're in layers. I only see the superficial one over here. The one right on the surface is called the external oblique. It's on both sides. It's the superficial one, which I guess you'd get from the external name, right? Is that good? Why is it called oblique? Do you remember this from learning about muscle names? The fibers run diagonally, don't they? So if I look here at my rectus abdominis, I see fibers running straight up and down. If I look at the side, I see that the fibers run at an angle. With the external oblique, pretend you have a jacket on, put your hands in your jacket pocket like this, and then look at the direction of your fingers. See my finger direction? That's my external oblique fiber direction. Right? What happens if these fibers shorten? What does my body do if a fiber pulls from here to here? If I pull these 2 things together, what do? Right? So I'm flexing, but I'm also rotating at the same time, aren't I? So these are going to work with those little multifidus and those rotatories. And so I've got complementary muscles that are helping to do this rotating action. And if I pull this side, I'm going to rotate this way and down. If I pull this side, I'm going to rotate this way and down. Some people that really like to exercise their abdominal muscles will not just do the crunches, they'll do twisting crunches, right? And that's working these lateral muscles. Get those involved. Now, we said there's 3 layers, so if you come over to this side over here of the picture, you can see that they've cut right here. If we look lateral here, they've cut away some of the external oblique. And now what do we have? We have an internal oblique. Again, you can see that the fibers are diagonal, but they're 90 degrees to these others, aren't they? So I got a muscle that's running diagonally this way. Now I got a muscle that's running diagonally the other way. See what's happening here? I'm building in these layers of muscle that can pull me any which direction, right? I got a muscle to go this way, I got a muscle to go this way, I got a muscle to go this way, right? So I'm building in the ability to just twist and turn and pull and bend my torso in many, many different ways. The third, the deepest layer, you see again, they've cut a window here. And now we have what's called transverse abdominis. And when I think of something transverse, I think it running across my body. And so that's what I've got here. If you look at the fibers here, the fibers run straight across. Now, how does this look when you put it all together? One interesting way to look at this is to cut horizontally across the body here, and then look at how the connective tissues and the muscles are related. And again, I like your textbook. It's got a picture like this. Here's a picture where we've cut across the body wall. What's this thing out here right there, do you think? That's what? That's your skin, right? There's your skin. There's the fat, the subcutaneous fat, that layer of fat that's right below the skin. And then here's our muscles. So these 2 round pieces there must represent the rectus abdominis, right? Those are the rectus abdominis. And you can see it's completely enveloped. This would be like the right side and the left side. It's completely enveloped in connective tissue called the rectus sheath. So that's rectus sheath right there. Now we should probably know one other term associated with the rectus sheath. The connective tissue right in the center between the 2 pieces. The line of connective tissue running right down the middle of the belly here is known as the linea alba. Linea alba. It sometimes gets stretched. I had a very interesting woman in one of my classes many, many years ago. You know, one of the first few years I was teaching here, I was teaching a couple of night classes. And a very interesting woman. She was pregnant, which isn't totally unusual. I sometimes have pregnant women here. She was pregnant, not real tall, motherly type, you know, young but motherly type, you know, just real friendly, had, you know, made friends in class right away. She was on her 4th pregnancy, so she had a number of kids. What was unique, though, is her 3rd pregnancy, she carried twins. And when she had her twins, they were 7.5 pounds each. So right up to birth, she had 15 pounds of baby in her. She wasn't all that tall in the first place. So guess what happened? You know, she had just stretched, all of that pressure had just stretched the linea alba here. So the rectus abdominis was several inches apart here. You know, and she still had connective tissue there, but it was, you know, I didn't go exploring, but, you know, she let some of her girlfriends, you know, and there's a gap there between the 2 muscles. And she had to have a special belt kind of, you know, girdle kind of thing on to keep it all together, to help give her support. You know, and some of the talk was about, okay, is this the last one? You know, she was now going to have 5 kids. You know, was this the last one, or was she going to have another kid? And If this was the last one, then she'd go in and after the birth, she'd have them stitch it all back together and tighten it up again. So it was interesting. But whenever I talk about Linny Alba here, I always think of her. And that's that line right there between the two. Okay, now if you look out here, you can see the 3 layers, can't you? What's this layer right here then called? This is external oblique, okay, is right here. And so this one must be, okay, good. And then this was the transverse abdominis. And you can see how their connective tissues all have to tie into the rectus sheath, don't they? Right? Okay. It helps too if you can see, we've just seen little windows of these muscles. Let's look at these muscles in total. Right? And again, this is helpful. If I look, I can see the fiber direction. What muscle must this one be if the fibers are running this direction? External oblique, isn't it? Yeah, that's the external oblique. You can see how it anchors on the ribs, runs down here, right, into the rectus. That white there is all the rectus sheath. Okay, this one must be, yeah, and see the diagonal nature of it here. This is internal oblique, right? And then here you can see the fibers are running straight horizontally on here, and so this must be the transverse abdominis. So you really want to get to know these 4 major abdominal muscles here and what they do. And we think of them primarily as flexors and rotators, right? Now they can be abductors too. If they pull on one side or the other, they can work with your vertebral muscles to cause that kind of motion. There is one other function here that you should be familiar with too. These muscles will cause in the abdominal area what we call compression. Okay? And what do I mean by compression? I mean, right? I mean, right? Where you just tighten everything up, and it's usually to get some sort of pressure in there to do something with it, right? Like maybe if you want to get those last few drops of urine out, you might, or, if you're having a hard time going to the bathroom, you might, and just that, right there. We also use this compression, though, to get air out of our mouth. Does anybody play a wind instrument? Trombone, trumpet, clarinet, flute, saxophone, right? Anywhere you need to get any singers in here, right? Either a choir or so, if you sing in a band or something. If you really know how to sing, you know how to use these muscles here to compress and force the air out. Opera singers are really abdominal athletes. They can hold these very long notes because they have precise control over these abdominal muscles, and they can compress just enough to get a stream of air that makes a sound, right, without using it all up at once, without squeezing it all out very quickly. And they can, there's a lot of control here. Actors and actresses. Anybody that needs to project their voice. Right now, I'm doing it. I do a little bit of this every day I teach. A lot of teachers, when they come into class, they just talk like they would normally talk to a friend. Now, class, come along. Let's do this. Let's do that. And it just doesn't cut it. You have to learn as an instructor to project your voice into the classroom, right? And so that people can hear you in the back. And all of that is just these slight, precise bits of control. Singing, instruments, speaking, any of that is due to a compression here. This is probably your primary compressor because it's not angling like it's going to pull you down. It's not angling up, right? It's not running straight up and down. It's just running around and just kind of tightening everything up and pulling. When this shortens, you're just kind of pulling everything in front in a compression type activity. Okay? So, abdominal muscle is very important for that compression that they give to the body as well. Now, we've spoken of the 4 major abdominal muscles. There is a 5th one in your list that's always considered as an abdominal muscle, basically because it runs between your ribs and your hips. But it runs way around here in the back, so you don't see it in any of these pictures we've done. You see it right here, right? Come back to this vertebral. Here's all those vertebral muscles we talked about, right? And here's a muscle sitting between your iliac crest and your 12th rib. It does have little anchors over onto the vertebra, so we could almost call it a vertebral muscle, but it's not. We're going to consider it abdominal muscle because it runs between the ribs and the hips. It's called quadratus lumborum, and you see it in your list there. All right. So those are the abdominal muscles. Let's now look at the breathing muscles. Okay, let's go to the breathing muscles. Here's an image that shows us muscles clustered in and around the rib cage. Now, right away, when you look at this picture, realize that a lot of the muscles are missing in this picture. They've just shown you some of them. Basically, every rib that you see here has 2 layers of muscle between the ribs. Every single one. All they've shown you is these 2 up here, but every one of these do. Now, they've only shown those 2 because they wanted you to be able to see this muscle right here. Okay, the number 1 muscle in this breathing arena is the muscle called the diaphragm. Now, before we talk too much about it, though, let me just stop you for a second. How do I breathe? I've told you that the lungs don't have any ability. Right? Breathing is getting air into my thoracic cavity and out, right? Are you familiar with this instrument right here? Do you know what this is? It's like a fireplace bellows. Blacksmiths would use this kind of thing. This is meant to pull air in and push air out, isn't it? How does air come into this thing? There's the little opening. There's the little pipe that lets air in and out. And this is a big pouch right here, isn't it? How do you get air into this? Yeah, you take the 2 handles and you pull it open and you make the space inside bigger and air gets drawn in, doesn't it? And then if you take these 2 and squeeze them together, what happens? The air comes shooting out, doesn't it? So if I have an enclosed chamber and I can make the chamber bigger, air is going to get sucked in. If I squeeze the chamber, air is going to get pushed out. And that's basically all that's happening here. My lungs don't have any muscles. It's the muscles in and around my rib cage that are making the rib cage bigger, the space bigger or smaller, and air is coming in and out of my lungs and my passageways. Okay? So, the first muscle that we want to look at is the diaphragm. And here is, I thought this picture was a little bit better. It doesn't have so much other things in the way. Notice how far up into the rib cage this comes. Do you see that? We talked about organs last week and how the liver and the stomach can hide up under the rib cage. You know, my abdominal area has hypochondriac regions right and left, doesn't it? Right? It's basically because this muscle, the diaphragm, arches up. They say it's like an upside down bowl. I like to think of it more like an umbrella maybe, you know, without a rod in the middle, but it's got this big arched sort of structure to it. If we go back to the picture that we use normally, let me just put some of these other things here. Let's go back to this diaphragm picture that we have here. They've got a lot of other muscles and organs here, so it's not quite as clear, but you get the idea, I think. Let's think about how this allows us to breathe. Where are the origin and the insertion of this muscle? Okay? The origin is actually, the muscle runs around the edge of the rib cage. And so the edge of the rib cage is where the origin is. right? It arches up and over and attaches in behind onto a couple of the thoracic vertebrae. This is where the insertion would be. So the muscle runs like this from here to here. You see that? Now, what would happen if that muscle contracts? And let me tell you this, the origin and the insertion are not going to move, right? I'm not going to pull the edge of my rib cage in or something. If the origin and the insertion did not move, yet the muscle got shorter, what would be happening here? Can you see it? Oh, let me ask this. What's the shortest distance if shortening is contraction? What's the shortest distance between the two? Between the origin and the insertion. What's the shortest distance between 2 points? A what? I can't hear you. Straight line? Okay. A straight line. So if the muscle right now is like this, curved in its natural relaxed shape, and I shorten it, it's going to become straight. It's going to become flat, right? What we say is that it flattens here. Blue here is the amount of airspace in the thoracic cavity right now before I contract. Yes? The diaphragm is up here. All of this is the airspace in my lungs. Now, when I contract the muscle, it contracts, it comes down, it flattens, right? Now, all of this space becomes part of this up here, doesn't it? The amount of space up here in the thoracic area gets bigger as the diaphragm comes down towards the abdominal cavity. Okay, now I've got this much airspace in my thoracic cavity, and that's going to suck air in. So when the diaphragm contracts, it flattens down against, now remember, it's flattening down against your abdominal organs, right? Your abdominal organs have to go somewhere. But now I've got more space in there. The muscle, the diaphragm flattens, and I've got much more airspace in here. Then when the diaphragm relaxes, it goes back into its curved shape, and I've got less space up here. So it's kind of like those bellows. I'm opening up the space, I'm closing the space. Okay? Questions about this? Think you see what's going on here? I can see that some of you understand. Some of you kind of look puzzled still. Questions? I think maybe the most amazing thing to think here is this is going on moment by moment every day. Does everybody here remember to breathe this morning? Did you remember? Aren't you glad you don't have to? How would it be if we had to remember to breathe? We'd all be dead, wouldn't we? We all would be. Right? You don't have to think about it. Breathing, this is the muscle for everyday breathing. This is probably the most important muscle in your body. If this doesn't work, you're dead. Okay? No matter what. Your heart could go right on, but if you don't breathe, if you don't get it oxygen, everything else in your body is going to die. And so this muscle, you think of this curved bowl-shaped muscle, and it's just going, doot, 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 doot. When they tell you to do CPR, you're supposed to do it like 10 to 12 times a minute. Every 3-4 seconds, your diaphragm's just going, boop, boop. When we're sitting here relaxed like this, we don't need lots of oxygen. We're not doing anything super active that requires a lot of energy. And so your diaphragm is just quietly doing this. You're not even aware of it, just like you're not aware of your heartbeat. Your diaphragm is just doing this. It's going so slowly that the air isn't rushing. It's just trickling in, trickling out, trickling in, trickling out. Your diaphragm is just gradually just doing these little contractions all day long to keep fresh air, fresh supply of oxygen coming in. Yeah, Veronica. no, typically what happens is, and this is one of the most amazing things about it, when I think of involuntary, things I don't have to think about, I think of smooth muscle and cardiac, right? Those are the ones I don't have to think about. This is a skeletal muscle. I can control this. If I want to breathe, if you learn to play the clarinet, I remember clarinet lessons in junior high, right? And it was, you had to learn to take your breath down here. You had to learn to breathe in because you can get a lot more air in with your diaphragm than you can with your other muscles. And you had to learn. And when you did that, your belly would kind of go like this, and you get this. I had friends in elementary school that could make a bowling ball. Did you ever? They could go like this, and all of a sudden it was just, just whammo. I don't know. But they must have had a huge diaphragm or something, or just, you got to relax these muscles at the same time and all of that. But that kind of breathing and that kind of control is all a part of this. So you use this diaphragm for this everyday breathing. It goes on if you don't think about it, but if you want to breathe, if you want to use the diaphragm, you can, because it's skeletal. You can control it. We're not used to it, so like if you take saxophone lessons, you've got to learn, breathe like this and do like, I'm using my diaphragm. So I can. Singers learn to do that. If you're going to learn to sing, you have to learn how to take a breath with your diaphragm. You want everything up here to be very relaxed, right? But you want all your tension to be down here, and you want to learn how to breathe in with your diaphragm, bring your abdominal muscles against that to create compression, and then just slowly release so that you get this steady flow of air. So all of that, this diaphragm is critical right here. Okay? When we talk about this, we talk about diaphragmatic breathing or abdominal breathing because it puts pressure down against your abdomen. There is another set of muscles, though, that work for a second type of breathing that we call thoracic breathing. And these are the muscles that are between the ribs here. These are the muscles between the ribs. What would I call a muscle that's between two ribs? Intercostals, right? And you can see I have two sets. I have an external intercostal and an internal intercostal. External intercostals are very, very, very much like the external obliques. Even to where they are an oblique type muscle. They are running at an angle. The internal intercostals are oblique like the internal obliques. And there's many, many, many of these because you find one set of these between each and every rib. When a muscle contracts, obviously the ribs are going to get drawn up toward each other or closer to one another, but they can be drawn closer this way or this way. How do I get a chest cavity bigger by squeezing these muscles? Well, the way to think of it is this. You got to notice something very, very interesting about your ribs. Look at the ribs right here. What do you notice about their orientation? Before I really had looked at that, I always thought ribs just ran straight around your body. Like totally horizontal, right? Do they? No, they run downhill, don't they? Look here. Look at the real skeleton here. See how they run downhill? Right? These ribs run downhill. Okay, and really the ribs are hinged in a sense. Let me go back here. The ribs are hinged in a sense back here against the vertebra, kind of like you see over on this side at this picture. Think of the handle of a bucket here. It's hinged against the side of the bucket. If it's down at an angle, is it close to the bucket or away from the bucket? Close, right? If I simply raise the handle, what happens to the handle? It gets farther away. The distance here gets greater. And that's what happens to my rib cage. If I just lift my rib cage, the angle of the ribs, as they come up more horizontal, they push the sternum and the front of my chest cavity out, don't they? So if I'm here and I breathe in, I see the front of my chest cavity come forward a little bit. And that increases the amount of space, and that draws air in. Anything that increases the size of my thoracic cavity will draw air into it. So I'm doing this by simply raising or lowering the ribs. If I lower the ribs, the amount of distance here gets smaller, and I'm forcing air out. So it's like I'm collapsing and expanding my chest cavity to get air in and out. And these muscles are doing that. I've got the external intercostals. When you see them by themselves, they look like this. Right? I have the internal intercostals. A lot of people don't realize there's so much internal intercostal, because when you see an external picture, you see these, lots of these, but there's actually more internals than there are externals, aren't there? Yeah. And you can see these run diagonally like external oblique. These run diagonally like internal oblique. Okay? Now there's one other element to this thoracic breathing. It's one thing to be able to draw every rib to one another, but does that raise the whole rib cage? Not necessarily. I'm going to need a couple of other muscles to work with these intercostals. And the two other muscles that I want to associate here are the scalenes and the internal oblique. Now, the scalenes are shown here and here. They're up in the neck. They attach from the cervical vertebra onto the first two ribs, like you see here. And so these muscles are used to pull the first couple of ribs up. Okay? Pull the first couple of ribs up, and then all the other ones, if they get squeezed together, will be coming up towards the others that are being pulled up. In this picture, it helps too. You can see how the pectoralis minor could help this, couldn't it? If I stabilize my shoulder, normally I think of the pectoralis minor as pulling my scapula forward, but if I anchor my scapula here with a couple of other muscles, I can use that to help pull my ribs up as well. So I've got some scalenes and some other muscles here that raise them up, and then the external obliques are also pulling the ribs up. And so I think of all these muscles as part of inspiration, breathing in. Think of the in part of that as breathing in. So external obliques and scalenes are partners in thoracic inspiration. Expiration, breathing out, is the internal internal intercostals. And notice that they're angled down and back, right? When they contract, they're going to be pulling the ribs down and posteriorly. And their partner is this internal oblique. See how it's angled the same way? If this contracts, can you see how it's going to pull these ribs it's holding on to down? It's going to pull these ribs down, isn't it? And that's going to cause the ribs to come down. The distance from front to back gets shorter, and I'm breathing out. If you're blowing up a balloon, you're using these muscles. Ever had to blow up those little tiny skinny balloons? Just trying to get that air out. You're compressing, and you're pulling with your external obliques. You're pulling with your internal intercostals. All of that is trying to pull the ribs down, collapse the rib cage, and blow air out. Your diaphragm, remember, every muscle contracts. The diaphragm can go down, can draw air in, but it can't push air out. All it can do after that is relax. It takes these muscles right here to push air out. Internal oblique and internal intercostals. If you can't use these muscles, you can't cough, you can't sneeze, can't do any of those kinds of things that gets air out of the thoracic cavity. These are very, very important as well. Question about breathing muscles. Okay, how are we doing? I've been talking here. I've got one more group of muscles. Should we take a break and then we'll come back to those? Or are you starting to fall asleep? Are you starting to fade? Or should I do this last group of muscles and then we'll take a break? Can you hang in here with me? This last group is actually short. Okay. Here we go. Okay, let's look at the very last group of muscles. Maybe this will get your attention. Okay? Right here. Okay, we're down in the pelvic area. Okay, perineal muscles. Okay? Sex sells, doesn't it? Right? Okay. So we've got the male pattern here. You can recognize the base of the penis here, I think, and that this is what we call the perineal area. Here's the vulva, right, the anal area of the female. As you look at the two, notice right away there's a lot of similarity, isn't there? Right? You can see the same basic muscle. The genetic code has told the muscles to adapt themselves into a male pattern or a female pattern, but you can pick out between the two the same basic muscles, and they're going to have the same names. Just going to have slightly different things to do in each case. Now, probably where we want to start is with sort of segmenting this out. Notice that there's an area that you'd really consider your urogenital area. In fact, this is typically called the urogenital triangle. Do you see that? See the triangle here? Right? In both cases, I've got a triangle here in the urogenital area. And I've got a number of muscles that support that. If I come back to this anal area, I just see a big, broad muscle that's kind of like a diaphragm. In fact, we call this the pelvic diaphragm. It just kind of closes off that outlet. What can help to get the basic layout here first is to go inside, though. Let's look into the pelvis from the inside. Right now we're looking at the outside, aren't we? Let's look at the inside. Do you remember this picture from the lower limb? Okay, I'm looking down into the pelvic cavity, aren't I? I can see the sacrum back here and the coccyx, right? Now let me add the muscles to this picture. Let's put muscles into this. Okay, here's what it looks like with all of those muscles in place. And you can see all of that opening that's there is all enclosed with muscle, isn't it? Now, basically, you want to think of it two ways. There's these two muscles in the back, and then I've got this big floor-like muscle. And by in the back, I mean like this. If you look here at the pelvic cavity, I've got this outlet here, but I've got these sciatic notches here, right? So what happens is these two muscles here, remember piriformis? We did that in the lower limb. And here's coccygeus. What do you think that anchors to? The coccyx, right. You're going to see how important the coccyx really is here. So these two fingers here, if I hold this like this, these two fingers represent the piriformis. It comes right out through the greater sciatic notch. Remember we said it covers the sciatic nerve? Remember how that's the surgeon always wants to know where piriformis is because that's where the sciatic nerve starts. Right? Now, coccygeus is these other two fingers, and it anchors down here on the coccyx. So really, see what I've got now? I've got all of this area posterior all closed up, don't I? And what I've got left now is this opening, this sort of more rounded opening at the bottom. And that's going to be then covered by this muscle that we call levator ani. Now, in reality, we're going to use the group name levator ani. In reality, levator ani is these two muscles, iliococcygeus and pubococcygeus. What do you keep hearing? Coccyx, 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 right? You know, many people discount this little tailbone, but almost all but this piriformis, all the major muscles of the pelvic floor here anchor into your tailbone. You know, you sprain that, you fall on that wrong and sprain that thing, you're going to hurt for quite a while. How are you going to stop from moving these muscles down here? Pretty tough, pretty tough. If your muscles keep pulling on that when it's already sprained or injured, it's going to be tough. Not going to feel good for a while. You also know levator ani intimately. It's the one that helps you get to the bathroom in time. Ever had sort of a little emergency? All of a sudden, it's coming too fast and you got to run to the bathroom. And what do? You go, "Ah," right? You kind of pull yourself up, don't you, from underneath? You kind of levator, right? Elevate. You just kind of raise things up in there because it gives you extra squeeze and you can just hold on till you get to the toilet. Okay? This is real stuff, isn't it? Everybody's smiling. We've all done this. We've all had some sort of little emergency that we had to run for. You don't want it to happen very often, but it happens. So this is levator ani. You can see the anus is right in here. If you start contracting this muscle, it's going to put cross pressure on that. The muscle runs, the only gap that's here is right here in the center where you've got the anus and perhaps the vagina if you're female, and the urethra coming through right there. So this levator ani is covering all of this. Let's look at it again in the picture from our book, right? So here's levator ani surrounding it. I have an extra muscle here around the anus called the external anal sphincter. A sphincter muscle is a circular muscle that when it contracts, the circle gets smaller and it closes an opening, doesn't it? This is the muscle that you teach a child to use when you toilet train them. Right? They're not used to using all these different muscles. Your digestive system has a self-controlling system. Right? A baby, a toddler doesn't poop 24 hours a day. It isn't constantly running out of them. There is a smooth muscle, involuntary, an internal anal sphincter, that's smooth muscle, that closes the rectum so that waste material isn't coming out all the time. But when the rectum fills up, when it swells, when the muscles in the rectum stretch to a certain point, the digestive system says, open the opening, and the anal sphincter opens and it comes out. And that's what happens. You never know when a baby's going to poop, but all of a sudden they've pooped. Right? All of a sudden that's open. So what you want to do is you want to teach a kid to become aware of when that internal muscle is letting go and you feel things starting, and then you want them to be able to take this skeletal muscle and go, and close that and go to the bathroom and then let it go, and then they can control their bowel movements. And the same thing actually happens up here. They don't show the muscle here, but your urinary tract has the same thing. You have an internal anal sphincter near the bladder that keeps everything in the bladder until the bladder gets to a certain size, and then you start getting signals. It's time to go, right? And that muscle is starting to let go, and you've got an external skeletal anal sphincter, and you can hold until you get to the toilet and then let go. And that's part of toilet training, is learning to use those skeletal muscles. Now, in the urogenital triangle here, you have, again, a crossing muscle, kind of like levator ani. We call levator ani the pelvic diaphragm because it closes, the muscle closes all of that opening. This is called the urogenital diaphragm. This is the deep transverse and supratransverse perineal muscles. The muscles that say perineal in their name are the urogenital diaphragm. So I've got two layers of muscle up here supporting my genital urinary structures. And then the last two muscles that you want to focus on are the two that are in and around the genital area. And these do have functions within the reproductive structures here. The side ones over here are ischiocavernosus, right? They anchor on the ischium. And the one that's in around the vulva here, in the vulva in here tight, you can squeeze these to tighten this area, is bulbospongiosis. Really takes its name from the male, but it's the same. We use the same names, both male and female. Bulbospongiosis, ischiocavernosus. If we look at the male, let's look at the male pattern here. You see in the male pattern, same thing. Levator ani, external anal sphincter, superficial transverse perineal, the deep transverse perineals. Here's the ischiocavernosus and bulbospongiosus around the base of the penis there. Okay? So, you know you're going to see many, many of these pictures on the quiz. You want to be able to simply name the muscles. The function column there is for the test in a couple of weeks. Just be able to name the muscles. Coccygeus, I doesn't show, so don't. You should know where it is, but you won't have to label it in any pictures because I don't have any pictures that show it. Okay. If you do want to use, you know that picture I showed you looking down into the pelvic cavity? If you want that picture, I did put it online. It's in the course documents area of our Blackboard website if you'd like that picture to study or to look at. I won't use it on the quiz, but it really is handy to get your whole mind around these muscles and how they fit. Everybody good with that? Okay. Anything else then on the muscles?